Penguin Random House Audio presents The Sleeping Beauties and Other Stories of Mystery Illness, written and read by Suzanne O'Sullivan.
To try to understand the experience of another, it is necessary to dismantle the world as seen from one's own place within it, and to reassemble it as seen from his. John Berger, A Seventh Man, 1975. Preface. The Mystery Illness. Mystery. Anything that is kept secret or remains unexplained or unknown. I first heard about it from a news website in late 2017. The article, headlined Sweden's Mystery Illness, told the story of Sophie, a 9-year-old girl who had fallen into a lifeless, unresponsive state more than a year before. Sophie couldn't move or communicate. She couldn't eat or even open her eyes. In fact, for a very long time, all she had done was to lie completely still, showing no indication of knowing day from night. The article included a picture of Sophie. It showed her wrapped in a pink blanket. Pinned to the yellow-striped wallpaper behind her were a child's drawings. Hers, probably, from an earlier time. She was not in hospital. This was her own bed in her own bedroom. Despite her unresponsive state, medical tests suggested that her brain was healthy. Rather than explaining the coma, her scans said she was not in one at all. With nothing to actively treat, the doctors had sent her home to be cared for by her family, and there she lay, many months later, getting neither better nor worse. Although the headline made it sound as if Sophie's illness was a complete enigma, the body of the article suggested that the cause was not entirely unknown. Sophie had entered Sweden as an asylum seeker. In her home country of Russia, her family had been subject to persecution by the local mafia. Sophie had seen her mother beaten and her father seized by police. Her illness had started very soon after she and her family had fled Russia and entered Sweden. With good reason, her doctors assumed that the illness had a psychological cause. As a neurologist, I am familiar with the power of the mind over the body, more than most doctors perhaps. I regularly see patients lose consciousness through a psychological mechanism rather than as a disease process. I would not consider this phenomenon to be at all rare or even unusual. At least a quarter of those referred to me with seizures, many of whom believe they have epilepsy, proved to be suffering from dissociative or psychosomatic seizures. Those high numbers are not specific to my clinical practice. Up to a third of people attending any neurology clinic have a medical complaint that is likely to be psychosomatic in nature, meaning real physical symptoms that are disabling, but which are not due to a disease and are understood to have a psychological or behavioral cause. Paralysis, blindness, headache, dizziness, coma, tremor, or any other symptom or disability one can imagine has the potential to be psychosomatic. And of course, it's not just a neurological phenomenon. Any organ in the body can be affected, and almost any symptom can be generated in this way. Skin rashes, breathlessness, chest pain, palpitations, bladder problems, diarrhea, stomach cramps, and on and on. Despite the ubiquitous nature of these disorders, many people still doubt them, considering them somehow less real than other sorts of medical problems. I admit I struggle to see where this underestimation comes from. I am aware of all the ways in which my own body speaks for me, often unbidden. My posture changes with my mood. Poorly controlled facial expressions inadvertently reveal my opinion to others, even when I don't intend it. It doesn't seem a stretch, therefore, to suggest this embodiment of a person's inner world has the potential to extend into illness. That the body is the mouthpiece of the mind seems self-evident to me, but I have the sense that not everybody feels the connection between bodily changes and the contents of their thoughts as vividly as I do. So, when a child becomes catatonic, in the context of stresses of the most extreme sort, people are amazed and perplexed. Perhaps it is not so surprising that the general population undervalues psychosomatic disorders, if you consider for how long they were neglected by doctors and scientists. For most of the 20th century, neurological, psychosomatic disorders under the names hysteria and conversion disorder was still viewed through a Freudian lens. In Studies on Hysteria, his seminal work on the subject, Freud imagined the seizures, paralysis, and various disabilities of hysteria as arising from hidden psychological trauma, which is then converted into physical symptoms. For example, a woman too frightened to express herself might suppress the source of her fear and in so doing lose the power of speech. In Freud's formulation, every symptom could be tracked back to a specific moment of psychological torment. That viewpoint had such traction that even today, many people, including a large number of doctors, still regard repressed trauma and denied abuse as the full explanation for all psychosomatic disorders. This has created decades-long counterproductive relationships between doctors and patients, in which the doctor insists that their patient is in denial about an unresolved conflict, and the patient's subsequent refusal to accept that viewpoint only goes to prove the doctor's point. The stagnation of scientific progress in the field of psychosomatic disorders left lots of room for a mystery narrative to develop. How is it possible for someone to fall into a coma when their brain seems perfectly healthy? What causes the leg paralysis of a psychosomatic disorder if the nerve pathways are all intact? How does that ethereal thing referred to as the mind cause seizures? In fact, in the 21st century, a considerable amount of work has gone into answering these sorts of questions. In the field of neurology, psychosomatic disorders have become an area of great interest, resulting in a rapid growth in research on the subject. In the scientific world, at least, the one-dimensional concept of stress converted into physical symptoms has been debunked and replaced by more sophisticated explanations. The problem is that these advancements haven't yet made their way very far beyond specialist doctors and patient groups into the wider public conversation. What was once called hysteria is now referred to by some as a conversion disorder, or more recently and more aptly as a functional neurological disorder, FND. In most medical specialties, the term psychosomatic is still used to indicate medical problems in which the bodily symptoms are thought to have a psychological cause. However, in neurology, the word functional has increasingly replaced psychosomatic. Functional is considered preferable because it indicates that there is a problem with how the nervous system is functioning, while disposing of the prefix psych, which is too often wrongly distilled to mental fragility or even madness in people's interpretation. Functional implies a biological problem, but without the assumption of the presence of stress that has existed in all previous versions of these types of disorders. It leaves open the possibility that emotional trauma is not the only means by which psychological processes can affect the functioning of the brain to lead to disability. Both psychosomatic disorders in the realms of general medicine and functional neurological disorders in neurology are incredibly common and have the potential to be very serious medical problems. Yet people aren't always aware of that, because in the public arena they can be very hard to spot, hidden as they are behind euphemisms, clichés, and misunderstanding. That is aptly demonstrated by FND's media portrayal, where it is commonly referred to as a medical mystery. In 2019, the Mirror newspaper ran a story with this headline: "Mysterious illness causes girl to have seizures and wake acting like a toddler." The article told the story of Alethea, a 10-year-old schoolgirl from Lincolnshire, who had developed limb weakness and seizures. The problem started with pain in her feet and progressed to light and noise sensitivity. In time, her muscles became weak until at her worst, she couldn't even lift her head off her pillow. Her symptoms culminated in the development of regular seizures that were followed by odd childlike behaviour. She forgot how to use a knife and fork and had to be fed like a baby. Despite the mystery headline, Alethea had seen a neurologist and had been given a definitive diagnosis: non-epileptic seizures, one of the many names for psychosomatic seizures, and a functional neurological disorder. Clearly, the journalist who wrote the piece did not recognise these diagnoses as legitimate medical conditions, because alongside them he stated, medical tests have not been able to provide any answers. After reading about Sophie and Alethea, I started wondering why the phrase mystery illness had become such a staple of media reports about psychosomatic and functional medical disorders. It can't be the fact that we do not fully understand the cause and can only make educated guesses at the biological mechanisms that produce psychosomatic symptoms. because there are numerous neurological conditions for which we don't know the cause.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?